Hello, dear viewers, and welcome to a new episode of Business Insider. In tonight's episode, we'll be talking about the effect of the Russia-Ukraine war on global economies, the effect on the global economy as a whole, and the effect on the developed and developing countries, and especially, of course, with the rise of food prices and energy prices and inflation that is hitting the entire world, and that is hardly hitting specifically developing nations more than any other nations. We'll be also talking about, whether we are still in the middle of this effect, or are we drawing closer or near to an end to that effect, the effect of the Russia-Ukraine war, and whether there are any opportunities, if any, from that war that could bring economic opportunities here or there. That is our main topic for tonight. But first, and as usual, we'll be taking a look at our major stories making the economic headlines for this past week. The Minister of Health and Population, Dr. Zeinab Nawar, has signed a cooperation protocol with his Portuguese counterpart, Manuel Pizarro, to boost the health and pharmaceutical sectors. The protocol covers the fields of healthcare systems development, the latest healthcare technologies, employment, planning systems, enhancement, executing and following up on healthcare services, exchanging expertise and qualifying medical staff in various medical specialties, as well as paramedics as per the latest scientific protocols and technologies. Under the agreement, health sectors in Egypt and Portugal will exchange expertise and information in the areas of information systems, healthcare sector digitalization, health science research, alongside pharmaceutical, cosmetics, and medical equipment development industries. And the National Program for Community, Human and Local Development, Mashru'ak, or your project, has executed 204,000 projects since its launch in 2015, with total loans amounting to over 26.2 billion Egyptian pounds. That's according to the Minister of Local Development. The projects have created 1.6 million job opportunities all over the country. In April, Mashru'ak participated in the implementation of 700 projects with a total of 200 million Egyptian pounds in loans, which contributed to offering around 9,300 jobs. The governorate of Almenia topped the country's governorates in terms of the number of projects executed within the initiative, with 22,900 projects financed via 2.8 million Egyptian pounds. The projects in Almenia provided more than 158,000 job opportunities. Sohag came in second position with funds worth 2.8 million Egyptian pounds for 21,600 projects, creating 152,600 job opportunities. And the Saudi-based power plants developer ACWA Power and the UAE's Al-Khazar Energy have shown interest in acquiring the wind farms located in Egypt's Gabal al-Zayt and Za'farana. The two companies are among 7 international and local firms interested in the takeover deal, including Egypt-based renewables provider Infinity. ACWA Power, Al-Khazar Energy and Infinity have not submitted any official offers as of yet to acquire the operational plants, but the feasibility studies are ready, and the strategic investor will only replace the farms turbines. The transaction is expected to be finalized before the end of 2023. Those were our top stories. Time now for a short break. When we come back, we'll be introducing you to our guests with us here in the studio, as we'll be talking about the effect of the Russia-Ukraine war on the global economy and specifically on developing nations. Please stay with us. Welcome back, dear viewers. Thank you for staying with us. With us now here in the studio is Dr. Zeinab Nawar, the economic expert. Thank you very much, Dr. Zeinab. Always a great pleasure to have you with us. Allow us, please, and allow us, dear viewers, to watch first a report about our topic for tonight, then come back and start our discussion.
Have already begun to emerge, and it will be reflected in several developments in the Arabian Gulf and other parts of the Middle East region. Fear of its repercussions has enveloped the rest of the world. The Russia-Ukraine crisis has led to Egypt's projected growth rate being downgraded to 6% at the end of the current fiscal year and to an expected 5.7% in the fiscal year 2022-2023, according to Minister of Planning and Economic Development Hala Said in a statement before the Senate, Egypt's consultative upper house. The minister said before the outbreak of the Ukraine crisis, Egypt has been aiming to achieve a growth rate of 6.4% in fiscal year 2021-2022 and 9% during the first half of the current fiscal year. She said it is expected that the growth rate to begin climbing again to reach 6.2% and 6.5% in the following 2 years, adding that those rates are high compared to neighboring countries who achieved a growth rate between only 3% and 4%. At the same time, the minister expected that investments will exceed £1 trillion for a second year, reaching £1.45 trillion in the new fiscal year, growth rate of 17%, with £1.1 trillion going to public investments and £350 billion to private investments. Said revealed that the value of Egypt's GDP is expected to reach £9.26 trillion, with a growth rate of 16.3% from last year, when the value of the GDP was estimated at £7.96 trillion. Minister Said's statements came on the back of a debate in the Senate over Egypt's socio-economic development plan in the fiscal year 2022-2023. The Senate is authorized by the Constitution to open a debate on the country's socio-economic development and prepare a report on it.
Thank you, Rasha Abdelhamid and Abir Hussein, for this report. And back here in the studio with our dear guest, Dr. Zeinab Nawar, the economic expert. Dr. Zeinab, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war has had a major effect on the global economy, and especially on the least developed or the developing nations, and maybe more on Africa than any other part. But let's first start by talking about the effect on the global economy as a whole of the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yes, in terms of indicators, if we are going to talk about the macroeconomic indicators, unfortunately, the effect of this war is huge on the GDP growth. If you just have like a scanning of the GDP growth for different countries around the world, starting from the US, going to the Asian countries, going into the Middle East, into Africa, Latin American countries. So we will see that for European countries, for example, we have 0% of GDP growth for this year, which is 2023. And for the US, we have some sort of shrinkage in the economy, so we may have that there is no growth, or we have a growth in negative, like what is happening in some of the European countries like Germany and Italy. What about the Middle East? I think for the Middle East, we will have a growth, but slow growth rate. For the African countries also, we may have a slower growth rate, and we have a shrinkage for some countries.
That's the macroeconomy.
This is the macroeconomic indicators, because it tells us how the worldwide economy is going to be and to what extent there is an economic problem or economic crisis worldwide. If we look at the U.S. economy and we see how this is a slower growth of GDP, this tells us a lot. One of the giant economies that has a big part in the economic game, they are facing troubles. They are facing huge amount of debt, crisis, falling of. Yeah.
But their troubles are much less than the rest of the world,
the rest of the world, yes. It depends on each country, and it depends where the country in the world economic game. And it depends also on the policies of each country and the flexibility of policies and how they have these types of different tools and different perspectives to deal with the crisis that is happening right now. What we have now is similar to the scenario of the Second World War II. Unfortunately, since I will tell you, since the end of the 1945,
so you didn't say the Great Depression of 1929.
No, it's the same. Why I'm telling you so? Because the Great Depression, the main reason of the Great Depression was a failure in economic policies. But when we are saying that we have a World War II, it's about the huge economic problem caused by a political struggle and political conflict between the giant economies. So we are in an economic problem because of political conflicts, and again because of the U.S. hegemony and these types of theories that who is going to control the world, who is going to have the main keys of the world. So in this struggle between these giant economies, we started to have this war, which is part of this struggle. I mean, we have this conflict since Corona, and maybe even before Corona, since the war between U.S. and China. Trade war. We have this series of conflicts along a number of years, which had ended by this war between Russia and Ukraine, also part of it. For those who are just knew that the issue of Ukraine and also these conflicts is an old thing since 2014. This is not something new that came right now on the stage.
I noticed you were hesitant when you said, it ended with Russia-Ukraine. You said, no, it's continuing with Russia-Ukraine. So you were telling us that standoff, in your view, is to continue.
Yes.
And might take other dimensions in other areas.
Yes, they will keep on this track, unfortunately, till we don't know what they're going to agree on, because if we are talking about the effect on the developing world, unfortunately, one of the giant economies in Europe, which are developed world, are greatly affected. When you talk about GDP growth 0% in Europe, this is a crisis. I had attended a very nice workshop with some of the Italian economists. They are just talking about the economy in Italy, and they just kept saying how to what extent the crisis that they are in because of the negative GDP growth and what they can do. And the Italians themselves, they keep on thinking what we can do. And they had done this workshop in Egypt to talk about the Egyptians and to see what they can do with the Egyptians, because they care about their relationships with Egypt and all of that. I mean, all the European countries in great trouble. Why? Because they are in an energy crisis. Energy crisis is part of what we can call energy security, of course. If you know that, if you're going to talk about security of countries, so we have political, we have economic, we have social, we have environmental, and we have energy security.
And food security, of course.
Of course, food security under the economic.
And this is where Africa has been, hit badly, very badly.
The issue that the weaker economies are the most affected. Why? Because they don't have the tools, they don't have this magnitude, they don't have this flexibility to deal with the crisis. The crisis is bigger than their GDP and their indices and their
and they import everything.
And they import a lot of products, and they have been used for a number of years. If you talk about the African countries, unfortunately, for the conflicts in some of the African countries and for the long history of expansion of Europe and colonization for these African parts and African worlds and African countries, which is still continuing right now.
In another
adding
form.
to that,
Yeah.
adding to that different crises, adding to that the climate change crisis also. So a series of crises that the world is witnessing right now, affecting all of the world. And I agree with you, the developing ones are the most affected of this continuing crisis.
Yeah, it's amazing, Dr. Zeinab, that the effect of the Russia-Ukraine war on the global economy has been much bigger than the effect of COVID-19. I mean, sometimes this is difficult to grasp because, I mean, COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, the world was paralyzed, no airlines, no business was halted, factories were halted, production was halted in many countries. I mean, Italy, you mentioned Italy. I mean, Italy was one of the worst hit by COVID-19, but it seems that the Russia-Ukraine war has a bigger effect than COVID-19. Can you explain to us how? Because, I mean, the first thing that would come to mind, such a virus that's threatening the lives of the billions around the world would be more harmful than a war between two countries, even if one of them is a really big country.
I will tell you something. I have two explanations for that. Number one, it's about the Russian experience and the Russian as an economy. Russia as an economy and as a country is a huge country with a lot of important economic dimensions and linkages with worldwide economy. Do you know that 70% of the imported energy of the European countries is coming from Russia? So we are talking about one of the main aspects and pillars of human factor for living, which is an energy.
But now they are finding, they are trying to find other means.
They are trying, but it's not successful to that extent. Do you know that now inside Europe they are starting to blame those in academia? They are starting to blame, of course, they start to blame the presidents at the Europe themselves that you had caused losses for Europe because there was a lot of stress 10 years ago from academics, from those who are experts in the EU countries themselves that they should maintain a strong relationship with the countries that are located in the northern part of Africa, which is us, Egypt and Algeria and Morocco and all of this, to look for different energy source than Russia. And they're looking for a sustainability of the energy resources.
And this is where opportunity could come. Because I mentioned at the introduction that some opportunities could present themselves in the midst of the crisis. This is an opportunity for our region. Yes,
this is an opportunity for us, but they don't work on, the Europeans themselves, they don't work on it, although there are a lot of those who are talking about the issues, and since maybe 10 years. So no action had been met from Europe. So this is why they are suffering right now. So the energy crisis is, I'm telling you something, sometimes it's much more important than the food crisis, because without energy you cannot get out food from anywhere. You cannot, the life will stop completely. COVID-19, yes, we have an epidemic, we have issues, but yes, and there was a lockdown, and there was lockdown, and you have, but you can't just maintain your life. But there is no energy, there is no life.
That's a nice explanation.
So Russia actually is controlling the European countries and an important economic blocks, which is the Europe, through the energy. So once there is a drop for these European countries and states, and because there is a lot of linkages also between Europe and different countries of the world.
So energy is your key word in explaining why the Russia-Ukraine war was more
without energy we cannot live. If there is no energy right now, so we not be in this nice program talking about what's happening in the world economy. So once again, what else also brought the crisis is the conflict between the giant economies. Once again, COVID-19, there was no conflict.
Right.
There was like a conflict between the US, yes, and China. But
in fact, there was some sort of union, in trying to confront the threat.
Now the world is moving in different direction.
Right.
For each block of countries, they are going to cooperate, and there is a new economic order. This is what also causes the issue that this type of, what we can say, crisis had caused a lot of issues And if you talk about the bilateral relations between different countries and the bilateral relations also between maybe different blocs, so the world now, or the countries of the world, they are trying to find themselves in new locations in terms of international political economy. So the world now is changing, and this is what makes this crisis is more aggressive. We are witnessing a lot of changes at a very short time. So this is why we have this type of political, economic, social, environmental, energy problems and aspects and crises everywhere.
I really liked your explanation. I mean, did you do a research or something on the topic before? Or did your students do projects or researches on the topic? Because it's very well explained.
Of course, we have to understand, to be a good economist and to also to teach to our students what's going on, we have to understand politics and we have to understand what's going on, because this will also let us go into a different direction to understand how the worldwide economy is moving based on how the countries are looking now for their new political themes to deal with this type of conflicts and worldwide conflict.
Right. So in COVID there was no energy struggle and there was no political struggle. In fact, vice versa. Energy was not used as much, and politically there was some sort of cohesion or unity in confronting the threat. Now we have polarization, political polarization, and we have a soaring demand for energy that came after we got out of COVID. There was hunger for energy.
Yeah, we have what we can call regionalization of the world. So the world is going to be, we have like new blocks that will be all together, and there will be new blocks working all together. So this is the thing. So this is what caused all of these problems, and how these actions affected the other weak countries in Africa, if you would like to mention some of the developing countries, and all this, also internal political problems that is happening in some African countries as a result of this international conflict. So it all are linked. So this is why we are in this big and huge crisis. In COVID-19, we have a lot of meetings of G7, G20, and the leaders of the world, they had a lot of meetings to cooperate. So they are trying to contain the crisis, but now we are in a different situation.
There was UN relief for many countries around the world. So in the wake of the war, global oil prices rose to as much as $120 a barrel. But then they came down near 80 now, I think, around $80. So, are things better, or are we still in the middle of the crisis? And we don't know, are we still calculating the effects? And we're not going to know how much damage this is doing, until years and years pass. Or are we nearer to, some sort of a calmer landing, if we judge by the energy prices that came down, or by the inflation globally that soared at one point and that is slowly easing now?
Yes, we do hope that things will be better, because we are in what the numbers are telling us, and the indices, they are telling that everything is going to be better in terms of inflation rate is going to be slower and is going to decrease for the coming year, and also for the GDP there are hopes that the GDP will be better. But unfortunately, yes, if we are going to talk about what indices, what the numbers, what the countries are doing, it seems that things maybe is going in a better direction. But again and once again, we are in a scenario which is similar of the World War II. So we don't know what's going to come in this conflict. We may be in a direction that we will have a better indices and have a better economic conditions, but we don't know what this conflict is going to bring to us once again, the game this time, it's not economic game, because if it is an economic game or something related to an epidemic, I think that through the cooperation between the countries and between the leaders of the world, they had dealt with it.
We'll solve it.
But now we are
in
a conflict, which is, we have a multi of issues, a multi of parties are related, and a lot of interest.
So we don't know what's next.
So we don't know, unfortunately, what is next. So this is why we have this type of uncertainty, and this is why also this would also explain why we have these fluctuations in some of indices, why we have some of the factors and increase in prices that we cannot explain. So we will have a lot of things that we may not be able to explain because of this political economic crisis.
And the word uncertainty is the word that installs the most fear in markets and economies, right? It's a hated word.
It's a human behavior. And since you have this type of crisis and uncertainty, you will have what we can call a panic. So this panic attitude, this also can explain to us a lot of things that we cannot also understand, or a huge increase at a sudden increase in the prices, exaggeration, all of this, it's a human behavior because of the panic that had been caused because of this crisis. And also people are afraid from the future. So one of the issues also, maybe if you'd like to add, why you are saying that why this crisis is so huge,
I've been
is the
thinking
panic
about
behavior,
it a lot,
yes, of the humans everywhere. This would exaggerate
but
also
there was
the
panic
reaction.
in COVID. And maybe the panic in COVID was bigger.
The panic in COVID, that people were afraid about the disease itself and their lives.
I mean, people thought they were going to, I'm sure that a lot of people around the world thought this is the end.
But we didn't see in Corona this huge inflation, this huge...
and this is why I keep thinking, why would Russia-Ukraine war have a bigger effect? But you explained it when you talked about the energy, the energy factor and the political struggle factor, in contrast to what unity back then.
Maybe in COVID, this G7 and G20 meetings and the world are trying to contain the problem.
Giving vaccines to
and
the
then
poor.
the vaccine, and there is a solution. So this is maybe help that people will not feel that they are panicked, but there are solutions. But we are in a situation, we are looking for solutions, and the solutions is not in our hands. So what we can do, this is the thing.
Africa and the least developed countries or the developing nations have been really hard hit.
Yes.
Food prices rose tremendously in a bad way. Energy prices also, of course, fertilizers, and you name it. So, and Africa is already, suffering and trying to get on its feet. So could you talk to us about the Africa effect?
Yes, for the African countries, and unfortunately for every crisis, we have to look to Africa and to look to the African issues. Once again, unfortunately, because of the linkage between some of the African countries and Europe, now we have maybe 40 years or 50 years of ending colonization. And all of these mappings and all of these old maps. But for some of the African countries, still there are strong linkages with some of the European countries. So now, with the problems that are occurring in these European countries, so there is no support to these African countries. This is one of the issues for why they are suffering. Once again, the climate changes.
And sometimes European poles are battling each other on the ground of an African nation.
So their withdrawal now from some African, why they do this type of withdrawal? Because they are busy in their
own problems,
in their countries, whether we're talking about France or whether we're talking about Russia and all of that. So it left the ground empty for this type of civil war to occur in some African countries, for other problems to happen in the economies, in these African economies. And of course, and once again, we hope that for the African country, it would be a chance for them to work on their economies away from this international struggle or the linkage with the European countries, because unfortunately...
What should they do? I mean, the African countries were struggling anyway. So, yes, now they are struggling more. But how can they take it as an opportunity if there is an opportunity?
They should work more on themselves. Some of the African countries, actually, they succeeded in that, but others not. And this is why they're still receiving this type of crisis and these types of problems. And we cannot deny that still Africa are used as one of the sources of the raw material and precious material and whatever,
right,
and had been used along a number of years, hundreds of years, as one of the important sources of manufacturing of England and manufacturing in Europe. So still this type of linkages unfortunately is in. So how the
Africa sponsored the industrial revolution.
Yes, one of the main
with its resources.
Slaves starting from the raw material and everything. So now they should end this type of what I say connections. Maybe it's not. We cannot blame the African countries because we have other countries are still in and they still maintain this linkage with these countries. No, they have to work on themselves. They have to work for their own politics. They have to work on their own development. Africa is rich in everything: human factor, raw material, in agriculture, even potential for industry. So they have to work on their self-sufficient, and this is what the crisis, learning lesson from this actually crisis. It's the self-sufficient. It's once again, I think most of the developing world are now, they have to work on that, because
even the developing world is working on that, and Europe is now working to try to depend less, for instance, on Russian.
And you have the US and China are working on that. Why they're working on that? Because US and China, they are working on achieving self-sufficiency because they are maintaining a second scenario if there is a war to happen between both of them. So they're working on this self-sufficiency to keep their economies safe. So the world now is moving into a very different direction.
And as always, the US is the least affected. As it happened in World War II, since you mentioned this is close to the World War II scenario, always the US is the least affected. And usually they benefit from what happened, like what happened in World War II and before that in World War I.
This is their game, unfortunately. This is how they played smartly along maybe since 1945 and before and 1945 and after. And nowadays, this is what we can say, the US hegemony. This is a true theory in politics. This is how the US is maintaining themselves as a society, and they will not allow anyone else to take a part from their hegemony and their controlling of the world. So they are the one who have the keys, also part of the keys of the game, and they have their own tools and they are well prepared.
Since we are running out of time, I really enjoyed the discussion, Dr. Zeinab, but one final question. Suppose that there are wise minds everywhere and this big political struggle and fight eases for the benefit of all. Suppose this happens. How much time does the world need and do developing nations need to get out of the damage caused by the Russia-Ukraine war?
This is a very hard question.
Supposing that wiser minds will prevail.
I think it will take, if we would like to compare it with the case of the Second World War II, if we would like to have a case of it, what had made the recovery for most of the countries of the world at that time, it was what we can call Marshall Plan, when the US helped the European countries through financial aid. But now we are in a problem that we have a problem related to the debt, we have a problem related to the financial constraint worldwide. So the way out of this is through the work of the countries themselves to get out of this. It's not through any type of aid, no financial support, because for this big struggle, sometimes one of them is going to collapse. This is the thing that we don't want it to happen. But the struggle ends by other parties. Maybe they are losing, and others are the winning. And those are winning. We don't know what they're going to do to the rest of the world. So once again, we cannot put a time for that. But we are like guaranteeing on the countries and the leaders of the developing world themselves is to try to find out a way from this crisis. This is the only solution.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Zeinab Nawar, economic expert. It's been a great pleasure. And thank you, dear viewers, for watching this special episode of Business Insider. I'm Mohammed Abdelrahim, and I thank you very much for watching. Next week, same time, inshallah, is a new episode. Please stay with Nile TV International.